So, hi everyone. I just wanted to thank everyone for coming and joining us today for this webinar. We have Clay Robinson here with us. He will be presenting the topic of navigating U.S. export control regulations with SAP GTS. Clay is a senior SAP GTS consultant with Krypt, and he has nearly 10 years of SAP and trade management experience. On the next slide, we'll just go over some quick housekeeping. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to type them at any point during the webinar. You can use the bottom portion of your control panel, and we do have a lot of content to cover today, but we'll try to address all questions. If we don't get to your question, we'll make sure to follow up with you after the webinar. Now on the next slide, I'll just spend a few moments introducing Krypt, and then we can dive right into the webinar. So Krypt is a SAP Services and Development Partner. We've been a partner since 2008. We are operating globally with our corporate headquarters in Santa Clara, California. We have EMEA headquarters in Ireland and APAC headquarters in Bangalore. And we serve customers in over 35 countries. We aim to provide value to our customers by bringing together systems and business experts, pre-delivered content, and also unique high-value solutions, either out of the box or fully customized. Krypt operates in a variety of SAP solutions, including trade, warehouse, transportation, finance, HANA, and S4 HANA. And we also have proprietary solutions which complement the SAP standard solutions. And when pairing the two, our customers have in fact seen anywhere from 10 to 40% savings over 3 years. And on this slide, you'll just see a quick glimpse of some of our really great customers. Now I'll go ahead and hand it over to Clay, and he can start you with the educational webinar.
Hi, excuse me. First of all, I'd just like to thank everyone for attending. I know Wednesday is a really busy part of the week, so I really appreciate your time and attending. Now let me introduce myself again. My name is Clay Robinson, and I'm a senior consultant at Krypt Inc. I've worked with a focus on global trade and supply chain management since 2008. And I've implemented global trade management functionality in a number of different areas, primarily in the chemical, pharmaceutical, and consumer goods industry. A lot of my experience has been working with U.S. exports, so today I'd like to use this time to discuss some of the details around managing U.S. export regulations. Specifically, first I wanted to look at compliance with EAR and ITAR with GTS license automation. And then also adapting and using that functionality for other regulations. Then I want to touch on, related to that, the Sanctioned Party List screening with the new SAP HANA Search Algorithm in SAP GTS 11. And then finally, I'm going to touch just a status update really on the ongoing efforts with S4 HANA, the foreign trade simplification there. So just to jump into it, ITAR, EIR, license compliance, just a level set. Let me just define ITAR and EAR for the purpose of this discussion. The U.S. maintains two major sets of export regulations, and they have impact across a large number of public companies, private companies, educational organizations, nonprofits, and even individuals are affected. So ITAR, the International Traffic in Arms Regulation, is a set of regulations from the State Department that affects importers and exporters who deal in military equipment and information. And then EAR is the Export Administration Regulations, and that's a set of regulations now from the Department of Commerce over commercial and dual-use goods. And those dual-use goods are the ones intended for civilian use but may have an alternative military purpose. Just to kind of compare those side by side, as I said, the State Department regulates ITAR, while EAR is regulated by the Department of Commerce, Bureau of Industry and Security, or the BIS, and also the Defense Department is involved with ITAR. ITAR focusing on military items, defense articles, and the related data, where EAR is looking more at dual-use items that can have a commercial purpose. So for that reason, ITAR tends to focus more and it tends to impact more companies in the aerospace and defense industries, as well as satellite, electronics, navigation, some other areas, but anyone who manufactures parts for those companies who are involved with that. And then EAR, by contrast, affects a broader swath of industry, everything from manufacturing, chemical, oil and gas, consumer goods, pharma, energy, technology. Really, most industries are affected in some way by EAR. And both regulations actually cover information as well as physical goods. And while SAP has offerings in GRC and GTS in the area of information restrictions, today, for the purpose of this discussion, I'm going to focus on the physical goods. So if you look at the bottom of the table here for requirement for physical exports, you can see that in both cases, for ITAR, you've got to obtain a DDTC export license, which could be a DSP5 or some others. And also for EAR, you're looking at obtaining a BIS export license. So notice that in both cases, licenses are key for exporting these physical goods. And so that's kind of what I'm working up to with this intro. And then also, in addition to these two sets of regulations, I'm also going to touch on the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Asset Control, or OFAC. And that's more in relation to embargo on targeted individuals and countries. So as you can see here, both sets of regulations maintain some pretty stout fines for failure to comply. And for examples, you can look to EAR publications, which are published online. In many cases, for civil violations, the fines can actually go into the millions. It can also have additional steps like probationary periods, and those can put a lot of additional scrutiny on a company's compliance programs. And penalties can even go so far as to include denial of export privileges. In criminal cases, there's even been some imprisonments. But let's not dwell on this, because we're going to be proactive, get it right, and be able to prove to regulators that due diligence was performed. So from a high level, with both EAR and ITAR, you can think of this really as a three-step process. First, you'll go through your products and classify them, and in doing so, gain an understanding of which of your products are subject to regulatory approvals. Second, you'll actually apply for those licenses with the DDTC and the BIS. And this could include a DSP5, a technical assistance agreement, a manufacturer license agreement, or an EAR export license, or really one of a number of other possible licenses or permits. And then third is your overall compliance program, and this is going to include your procedures, your training, your record keeping, prohibited list checking, audits, and other processes that occur within your company. So I want to talk about how this all fits within SAP GTS, but just to give a quick overview of GTS for anyone who isn't familiar, it's the best of breed software solution from SAP, and it's capable of handling your complete global trade management for a worldwide organization. And how it works is it plugs directly into SAP ECC, or actually now even S4 HANA with native integration. And it can also be integrated with third-party SAP, non-SAP ERP solutions. So that can be helpful. Say if you don't have an SAP ERP system, or maybe you have a hybrid environment and you have a couple of different ERP systems, you can use both of those with GTS. So GTS has a lot of features covering all areas of global trade, from customs to free trade agreement, duty reduction, compliance, risk management. But in keeping with the export regulation subject, I've broken these out into the major ITAR, EAR compliance functionality into kind of three categories here. So let me just talk about that. First of all, of course, is product classification. So you can obtain your ECCN numbers, assign those, mass load existing product classifications, and retransfer classifications to the ERP system. And then that kind of becomes your single source of classification. The second part is the license management. And that is a single central location for all license management. And facilitates automatic determination of appropriate licenses. Excuse me. I just take a drink. And then handling nested licenses, tracking quantity and value, and tracking transactions to a license, and blocking transactions from moving forward. And then you've got several other things like screening against denied parties, and I'm going to get to that, and maintaining audit information for authorities. So we've been at the high level long enough. Let's look into the actual system and see where it's used for export regs. So first up is product classification. What you're looking at here is the main classification work list screen. And as you can see here, I'm setting up an ECCN number for a material. Now GTS will automatically take all your products and all your BOMs from ERP, and then it's going to put them in a cockpit where you can maintain classification. And this can include not just USML and ECCNs, but also HTS, tariff, Schedule B, all your other classifications. So again, this is your single source of classification across your entire company, and your ability to mass upload your existing classification into GTS. There's tools for that. There's a tool to maintain product classification for all your legal regulations, so not just related to EAR and ITAR. And then one of the cool things is there's XML data uploads of the lists themselves, which help protect your data integrity. So right next to the entry field, where you actually put in your classification number, is a detailed hierarchical search help. And that presents all the available categories by regulation type and lets you drill down into them. Now, this can be really helpful in finding the appropriate number. And GTS, in general, is going to completely prevent you from entering invalid values. So you're not going to get to a later stage in the process and do an audit and come up with bad data. And that's very important. Another tool accessible from the screen is classification search help, which can let you put in a given search term and help narrow down the possibilities. So the best practice we recommend is to make product classification part of your new product creation process and push that difficult task to those who are most familiar with the specific product. And that's in comparison to having the global compliance team handle that. That may not always be possible, but I think if I could ask any compliance team members on the call to raise their hands, if they've ever need to classify some products based on a label description, I'm guessing at least one hand would go up. So this can be a really useful tool in case you want to easily search through a reliably and frequently updated classification list from your data provider. So once you've classified your product base and you've used the reporting tools in GTS to help you identify which products are relevant for regulation and actually require licenses, you apply for those licenses. And then when you receive feedback, you will create matching licenses in GTS to track your transactions against those licenses and be sure everything's above board. So GTS is going to be your single point to manage all those licenses. And you can have nested licenses such as DSP5 within an MLA. Then you can track the values and quantities of your transactions to those licenses and maintain logging for future audits. Now, one of the key advantages to GTS license management over the now deprecated foreign trade functionality in ECC is the ability to have your transactions automatically roll up into a proper license. And this ensures that you get all your regulated products assigned to the proper license immediately, and make sure you're aware of any transactions for which no license exists. And then also importantly, you can do all that without having an impact on the speed of your order processing. In fact, it's actually going to speed it up significantly. So this is an image of the overall license. Let me talk for a minute. This is a process for automatic determination of license, which looks very complicated on this diagram from SAP, but don't panic. It's actually using a really straightforward, I think of it as a three-step process, using a combination of both the customizing settings performed by IT in conjunction with a strategy that's maintained by the compliance business team. So what I'm showing on the left of this slide is a list of the different criteria which can be used for determining the type of license you need, and that's kind of the second step in the process. But this is a really complex and hairy diagram, so let me just take you through a simple example of this to illustrate how it works. So first of all, the country of departure is going to determine your legal regulation, and that's pretty straightforward. In this case, over on the left, what we're seeing to the left of the diagram is the details. It represents the details that are part of the transaction in ERP or ECC S/4HANA that we're looking at. And then on the right is how that affects the licensing determination in GTS. So in this case, we've got a US country of departure. So that tells us that this is relevant for EAR and ITAR. The next step is looking at the country of destination, potentially some other criteria, but along with the product info, which is used by your compliance team's determination strategy. And that will tell you if any license is needed, and if so, what type. So in this case, we're shipping this order to China, and it's this particular ECCN 2B001. So that tells us that we need an EAR, individually validated license. And then finally, there's a last set of criteria specific to the particular license. So for EAR, individually validated licenses, you may have multiple licenses. Well, so this particular order is for a company called Software Inc. And based on the ECCN and the customer, GTS is going to determine a license. And the screenshot there is a little small, I apologize, but you can see that that particular license is for the customer in question. So you may find that there isn't an available license. In fact, in this case, Software Inc. is a company that I just made up while I was making this slide. So let's say I'm the CSR entering a sales order for this product to this customer. I'm going to find that my compliance team, my corporate compliance team, hasn't created an EAR license for this customer. So my sales order is going to be blocked. So when that happens, I'll call down and find out why, and they'll let me know that EAR actually prohibits me from shipping to this customer, as it's not in fact a verified end user. This is a dummy company, or not a legitimate company for this product. So what we have here with license functionality isn't limited to just taking a physical license on a piece of paper and putting that into GTS. This is actually a powerful, configurable way to group like orders together for any type of regulation, in some cases, even non-regulatory purposes. One new piece of functionality that I wanted to highlight that came in GTS 10.1 is the addition of an option to have region, or add region to the determination strategy. And you can see that highlighted in bold there. For anyone who forgot their SAP decoder ring. Region means state. So that means you can look into some types of regulations which aren't often associated with GTM software, even domestic rules, such as those on transporting toxic substances. And I'm thinking to the state of California or other states have similar requirements. You may have a permit for CA hazardous, and your GTS team can make your transactions tied to them automatically to make sure, for instance, that you don't exceed the maximum levels or aren't shipping on an expired permit. When the business compliance expert or power user creates his or her individual license based on the terms of the license they got from regulators, there's a variety of characteristics they can enter to be sure the proper types of transactions apply to it. So what I'm showing here is really the last step from that three-step example I showed a moment ago. So over here on the left, there's a list of different criteria which determine whether or not this license is needed, or I guess whether or not a transaction will be applied to this license. And so those criteria, there's maybe a few here, but the major ones that we use are, the company code, or in GTS, that's often called the Foreign Trade Organization, the legal unit, which is your shipping plant, business partners, country of destination and departure can influence this, your document number, which is your reference number, like your sales order number or your stock transfer order, delivery number, that kind of thing. And then the product number itself could be criteria for a license. The control class, which is the ECCN, USML, import code, project, and business transaction type. Any of those can be used. Also, you can set it up so that you only apply transactions manually, and that would mean unblocking them until they're manually approved. And this would be done for your more sensitive materials. You may also set up a virtual license for things like EAR 99, where no license is required, and that would just allow your orders to more swiftly flow through this process and not be confused with the more sensitive orders. It's really helpful to have quantities and values tracked against the license along with tolerances. Then you can block a transaction if it exceeds the mandate of your license. And another new feature in GTS 11 allows you to break down the limits by classification number. So that would be ECCN or USML, instead of having those apply across all products. So this screenshot shows an example of a license that has had sales orders applied to it, and showing how that affects the value and the residual value that's left on the license. There's a lot of things you can do on the license management, but a really useful one is the ability to upload and browse your attachments related to the license. So you could upload the paper license you received or any other documents associated with that, and then 2 years later, if there's some question about it, you're not looking through drawers necessarily trying to find some of these attachments or even emails that took place and documents that describe the decision-making process that went into the license and the orders that are attached to it. So you've got your products classified, you've got your licenses created, and your business transactions are automatically getting assigned to them. So what's next? Probably the most important is that this gives your compliance team the option to put a hard block on a given sensitive transaction if no valid license exists. So really the determination strategy and set of licenses that your compliance team has built is going to ensure that very, very few of your transactions will encounter a block. And when it does happen, it's for a really important reason. And in the example I showed a moment ago about Software Inc., let's say for a moment that a license wasn't found. The CSR is going to see a message similar to this one in ECC pop up for them. And then Also, downstream functions such as delivery creation and PGI can be stopped. So if you look here, there's a number of different things that are being screened on this order, but what we're discussing now is legal control, and you can see there that it is blocked. So that's going to tell the CSR and anyone else on the ECC what the problem is with this. Another thing is there's some really powerful reporting to identify your blocked documents and facilitate a quick response. And then just to talk a little bit about some of the other things where blocking is occurring in this particular screenshot, we're also looking at a country embargo situation, the sanctioned party list screening, and you can see that's blocked as well in this example. And then we've got letter of credit functionality, as well as environmental health and safety. So once a transaction is attached to a license, it leaves a trail throughout the document flow. And anyone who's done a lot of work with SAP is familiar with the document flow. It's simply the traceability of different reference numbers and how they fit together through the business process, like how a given sales order, delivery, or shipment are related together. For this example, this sales order, you can see it here. It's been attached to a license automatically, and then you can trace that to the customs declaration via the Documents of Evidence tab. And I apologize, I had to go pretty small on the screenshots here, but I think you can see that this EAR license is attached across all these documents in GTS. So you can see this document number, 1100040. It's just a hypothetical document number, but it's also attached here on your customs declaration. And so in addition to just the license number, really any of the information relevant to this license can be utilized in a number of different ways. So how you can use that, not only can you easily see that a given transaction has been assigned to a license, but also you can include relevant information from your license in both the printed Adobe documents or electronic communications. And this can apply both to your internal documents as well as communications with customs and regulators. So looking at the set of screenshots I have here, again, I know they're a little small, but hopefully you can see this well. On the left, what we have is a GTS customs declaration for export, and the tab that we're on in this shot is the communication tab, and what that is listing is all of the documents related to the logistics and customs clearance related to this particular shipment, and then also it has electronic filing options as well that can be executed from this same tab, and those can be either manually executed or executed automatically based on certain triggers. And so what that's showing there is the commercial invoice related to this document, and it was too small to show, but if you zoom in, you can see that the license is actually attached to the documents, and it's going to allow you to be able to not just put maybe that particular license number, but really any information relevant to the license that may be required by your regulator, and again on internal documents as well. So to kind of wrap up that segment, the information that you're doing throughout this whole process can be archived to meet specific retention periods, and EAR and ITAR both have specifically outlined retention periods that can be set and configured as part of the system. Also, any attachments and documents can be made automatically available, like through SharePoint or other content repositories, and usually that will be copies of the export documents that you produced, and there can be various reasons why you would want to expose those to, you know, in a secure way to others within your organization. Another thing that I definitely want to talk about is the detailed change logging. Really, what you can see whenever you go into any one of these documents or your classification, really any piece of work that is being done in the GTS system, because this is also sensitive and subject to regulatory audit and internal audits. Everything that's done is logged across all these areas. So what you can do is, just say for an example, on a license, you can go in and you can see when someone made a change, who made the change, what change was made, the values both before and after. So it's not limited to maybe what some of the older legacy systems that from non-SAP systems may have just had like a last update timestamp, and you're unable to find out a detailed list of all the changes that were made, but you can get that here. And then also really deep and configurable access control, leveraging SAP's security procedures and platform that can provide role-based security, and it can do it down to a very deep level of detail. For example, when working with ITAR, it can be important not to share things like schematics or bill of materials with foreign nationals. And I know for many of us, we all work in very global companies. So there will be situations where you may have users across your system, and that could be business users or IT support, contractors, that type of thing, that all have access to this system. GTS has a lot of standard templates that help you lock down various pieces of sensitive information, and then the same type of functionality exists within ECC as well. So that is a big help. Now, turning for a moment, it's still related to the compliance program, but SPL screening in general and SPL screening with the new SAP HANA Search Algorithm in GTS 11. So, you know, just to level set on this also as well, a sanctioned party list is a list of persons and companies with whom trade is prohibited by law. So sanctioned party lists are issued by government agencies and can be obtained from data providers. So the first two there on the top left are most relevant to ITAR and EAR, but there's a number of different regulations. A big one that affects most companies in the US is the OFAC. And then also, excuse me, in addition to that, there's also foreign governments, the United Nations, World Bank, US Justice Department, politically exposed persons lists, and a bunch of other entities that provide lists that in a lot of cases will need to be screened against. And especially for companies that are government contractors, the number of these lists that need to be utilized can be expanded. So I've talked about the list. Let me just quickly describe the process for how those end up in GTS. So SAP has worked with a number of major data content provider companies who provide the sanctioned party lists data in XML format, and it's ready to be automatically uploaded into GTS. So it's really a standard process, very simple to upload this information. One thing I wanted to point out is that Krypt does have some strategic partnerships with some of these companies that allow us to, you know, expedite that process and be a point of contact for you when dealing with and working with third-party content providers with GTS. So once your lists are loaded into GTS, in addition to just the lists themselves, it's also important to consider the master data. So as I described a little earlier on, GTS integrates very closely with ECC or S/4HANA, and it's going to, through a native interface that requires no development, it's going to transfer down all your customers, all your vendors, really all your business partners. You can screen on your plants. You can also integrate with the HR system or with your HR system and screen employees, which can be important for some industries. And in doing so, you'll be able to load all of your partners into GTS company-wide, and there's even potential functionality you could look at, even if you have maybe an acquisition company that isn't part of your ECC. There's various ways to bring those partners into GTS, and it can even go just as simple as an Excel spreadsheet that you can load. So once you have all your partners in, you have all your lists loaded, it's time to do your screening. So SAP GTS has right now 3 options for screening. Starting with the classic GTS, which is the oldest screening algorithm, and then the SAP T-Rex search, which improved upon that and has been around for some time, and then as well as recently with GTS 11.0, the HANA Search Algorithm was added. So just to kind of compare the benefits, pros and cons, you'll have this decision to make, or for anyone who may be interested in upgrading to GTS 11, the option of what algorithm to use is very important. So the GTS classic algorithm can still be used, and it can be used across all versions of GTS. And one of the benefits of it can also be a negative, is the high number of advanced and complex settings to fine-tune your screening results. That means that it's a little bit complicated to set up, and can although there's really no technical prerequisites for anyone who already has a GTS system in use, the procedure for setting it up can be complex enough so that you can potentially have a little bit of a long runtime in deciding exactly what settings are going to result with the best possible combination of, you're obviously going to want to catch all of the entries in the SPL list with as few false positives as possible. Then the T-Rex search improved on that in a major way by being the first one to introduce fuzzy search capability. And that's a fault-tolerant search that allows you to get around misspellings and added extra characters, things like that. I'll get to fuzzy search more in just a moment. The only downside, or a downside to T-Rex search, is that it requires administration of a separate T-Rex server, and it makes the configuration setup a little bit more difficult, and a little bit more hardware effort, that kind of thing. However, the license for T-Rex itself is generally included as part of GTS, so anyone should be able to use that should they want to. But now, last but definitely not least, is the new SAP HANA Search Algorithm, and it has a lot of benefits. It's very fast, it's very accurate, and it includes most of the really important features of classic T-Rex, but it has left some of the somewhat overly complex features of the classic GTS behind, and in doing so, it's simplified the SPL setup in a way that can really expedite not only your configuration, but really your project as a whole. And then finally, it's got really fast performance. And to get that going, there's a couple prerequisites. First, you just have to be using GTS 11 or higher, and also GTS has got to run on a HANA database. So normally I wouldn't really discuss configuration on a call like this, but because one of the major benefits of SAP HANA is it's very streamlined and easy to work with configuration, I did want to show a little bit of the configuration. In fact, it's so simple that just the configuration nodes involved make up a really good primer on how the functionality works, and it's something that IT can get the business users involved with and looking at when they're making the decisions on how they want to tweak it. So this is the main screen for settings specific to the HANA search algorithm. And I want to talk about the first one, number of packages. That's really a technical performance tuning that is relevant to multi-core systems, but that's only an IT parameter. That is something that can be considered by the IT team when they're tuning for performance. A key thing to note is the screening pattern. This is going to determine which fields will be included and excluded in your screening. And you'll notice right away, if you're familiar with classic GTS, that there's a lot less options in terms of which fields to screen on. So that's by design. It's part of SAP's focus on simplification in some of these processes. What they did was SAP talked with regulators and met with companies to understand more about the requirements and what really needs to be done, and we're able to get rid of some of these settings. For instance, no one is really screening on their PO box field 2. It just wasn't constructive to have that screening, and in some cases, the fact that the number of options was excessively high was leading to the potential for things to get missed or to have a lot of extra false positives. So this more simplified screening pattern, which screens really just based on 4 items: the name fields of your address, the address elements for your street, and then your city and country. SAP found from in-depth discussions that these were the pieces that were most important, that are going to result in the best outcome for most companies, and overall just make the process a lot more straightforward and increase the visibility to how it works. So beyond that, there's really 3 other major parameters that influence how you detect hits and how likely you are to catch real hits and how likely you are to get false positives. And that's really good, because by adjusting these numbers, it makes it very simple and very quick to kind of hone in on what settings you really need to have in order to get all your matches and not to burden the compliance team with a lot of false positives. So earlier I mentioned fuzzy search. Let me explain how that applies here. This exactness parameter defines the error tolerance for a single word. And now SAP describes fuzzy search as a fast and fault-tolerant search with SAP HANA. But I think of it as being like Google suggestions when you misspell a common search term. In this case, it's looking at individual words, though, within the business partner entries in relation to an SPL list. So in this example, setting this to 80% is going to say FARC is not equal to FARM. So let's say FARC is on the hit list. You don't want necessarily to, every time you have a company with the word farm in it, for that to increase your chances of having a hit. Whereas if you set this value too low, the FARC will match with FARM. And generally, so again, how it's doing that is with this fuzzy search. And we're really comparing a very large list of customers against a really large list from the SPL. And this type of analysis isn't easy to do in real time. That's why the power of the SAP HANA in-memory database comes in really handy here to make this possible. So the minimum score is the second parameter. That's how much of the entire content must match. And this is really useful when your exactness score is set too low or low at all. What this can do is, if you have some matching terms, but there's still a very significant difference in the overall content, then this can help offset that high or the low minimum score percentage, so that you're not getting burdened with an overly large number of false positives. And then finally, there's the percentage of matching words. That's very straightforward. Matching words of 66 is going to produce a hit for Jose Maria Cezanne against a hit for Jose Maria, whereas if you set that to 80%, you won't. So what you're going to want to do really is set up your sandbox system, get some partners in there that are validated by the global compliance team as being representative of your overall partner data. And then what you can do is create some temporary partners that are actually definitively on the hit list or close to the hit list. And then you can adjust these parameters running your results in your sandbox environment. And you can work in this way with your compliance team to really zero in on a number of false positives and to be sure that you're getting all the real positives. And then the systemic search, or symmetric, search is really just that same thing in reverse as the previous dialog box. It's going to perform that in reverse. So Jose Maria for Jose Maria Cezanne. So a quick status update, and I think we'll still have some time for questions after this, on the foreign trade simplification in S/4HANA. As you probably heard, in late October, SAP came out with the latest release of the on-premise S/4HANA, and there was a lot of innovation and new functionality brought into the solution in this latest release. While these innovations are in a wide swath of functional areas, and there's also been some innovations in the area of international trade for S/4HANA. And to present, the key functionality for that has been in the area of intrastat reporting, and also a really important one for the sake of this discussion is to mention the native integration, which is possible between S/4HANA and SAP GTS. Now, this integration is very similar to the integration of GTS with ECC, but is also providing some benefits in terms of some newer UI elements, and also is replacing the deprecated product classification functionality that exists still in ECC, but it's not the same in S/4HANA. So one thing to keep informed about in relation to S/4HANA releases is, S/4HANA is not a upgrade from ECC. It's in fact a new product that is re-architected, and in a lot of ways in doing that, ECC had 25 years of code and logic built in and various features, and it built upon itself. So with S/4HANA, SAP has taken a step back and is redesigning some of these business processes, and in doing so, that's had some impact on some of the functionality that was in ECC. It may not necessarily have a one-for-one equivalent in S/4HANA. So if you look out, on SAP's websites, there's some information out there about the impact of some of that simplification for anyone who is moving from ECC or using S/4HANA. And most of the changes are actually purely technical. They don't have an impact on businesses. Also, if you look at the list as a whole, there's a lot of different entries in it, but most of those are not going to affect every company. There's really only going to be a relatively small number of impacts to any given company there. But one area where I wanted to highlight is the foreign trade simplification. And I pulled this from the simplification list from SAP. So currently there are two software services, foreign trade and global trade services. And really at a high level, the foreign trade functionality as it relates to legal controls, which is the focus of this discussion, that specific functionality is not available, and SAP Global Trade Services is going to be the successor for that. For things like Interstat, right now already currently that can be leveraged within S/4HANA, but a lot of the additional functions right now are available for import and export management with GTS. And a note that SAP is provided is letting you know if you're using the foreign trade functionality in ECC and you're also integrated with third-party foreign trade systems, which would not include GTS, but if you're using any third-party foreign trade systems, that could have some impacts. And so you may need to look at your functionality and talk with your third-party solution provider to understand how that may impact you. And then again, SAP GTS can be connected to S/4HANA to run the respective trade processes. And this information is available for you to look through if you have any more needs, as well as we'll be having further discussions around this topic as additional information and additional functionality comes forward. So that's the main content I wanted to go over. I guess that brings us to the Q&A session. Kayleen, did you have anything you wanted to add at this time?
I don't have anything to add, but thank you so much for the presentation and for